the advisory group, which is the group tasked legally by the HDC to provide advice, to provide specific inputs on rules and regulations and guidelines for both areas. And we received a map, or the maps, which are very helpful, but we didn't receive anything else. Now, we did receive comments from a citizen. Actually,
I made copies.
Terry Norton forwarded those to you.
Yeah.
Would you mind passing those out, and then we'll have them for the record, and John will have a copy for the record, just for our committee.
These were given by Terry as a member of Nantucket. She's not on the board, but she's a citizen of Nantucket.
Right.
I think they're helpful, at least as a point of departure, for sure.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is kind of figure out how we're going to put these things in context and what our timeline is. I think the Nantucket Advisory Board role, like with the other boards, is really important. I think the idea of some type of a district out there makes sense, but there are like steps that need to be taken to prove it, like to make it that it fits the definition of a historic district. But we don't have enough information, I don't feel, from the advisory group to move forward with a recommendation.
Well, because there's no input as to what that designation actually means.
Right. So my feeling is we can talk about it, but I think we're kind of wasting our time to some extent.
I got it.
We need to get some input from them to formulate a recommendation. We can talk about it, we can talk about it a little bit. John has done work on it. John?
I think one thing, I think one goal of Brad Fleming's was when he was at the town meeting or planning board to establish the zoning map. There was a new extension of the 25-foot height limitation. I think one of his big things was just to get that all as one map. I think that's a start for him, as far as.
Yeah, we spent 3 hours with him last week.
Right. So I think that's a big start, but now that I'm saying this, that established Nantucket needs to incorporate some rules and
Because
policy.
without the rules or what they actually want to happen there, it's a moot point.
Well,
Right.
and what exactly, what happens is, one of the things I think our group needs to focus on, and it'll be on my list of things, is unintended consequences. It's wonderful to go through and do everything, but then you need to take it a step further and look at, well, what are the unintended consequences? Well, the unintended consequences of having Nantucket being 1.5-story, 25 feet tall, is that everyone is going to build a box, a nondescript box. Not everyone, but most people, that's 25 feet tall and 1.5 stories.
Yeah.
There's not going to be additive massing. There's not going to be all those other things they're going to be seeking to maximize. So, and when Val says it's, I think what you're saying, so with that background and the 3 hours, we really did spend 3 hours.
Yeah, we
with
did.
them, didn't we? The 3 hours we spent with the Nantucket Advisory Group representative the last time we met, we wanted more input because we don't want to go to we don't want to try and formulate a recommendation that's just, it's only one leg of a stool without some ideas of, you weren't here, so I'll just give you a quick, what we talked about was, we tried to give Brad, the Nantucket Advisory Group through Brad, some idea, the board, on how to do what it is we need them to do.
Right.
And what we're looking for is some idea of what rules or regulations you would propose and what guidelines. And then we talked about, Val came up with a great idea, bring images. My idea was, that's super great, but you've got to translate it to text because we're not here to be, like, we don't have the time to write all that out. We need to have something to start with.
Right.
And then some of those things can be what is not Nantucket historically, in your mind.
Well,
Right.
that's why I think this is a good
Yes.
start, and maybe we could forward this to Brad as a point of departure.
Or maybe we could get Terry on the to see
Right.
if she's interested in being on the Nantucket Advisory Board. Can she do that? I don't know as a town employee if she would be able to.
But with that in mind, one of my concerns is that people sign up to be these boards, but it seems they fall by the wayside, and there should be some sort of commitment. If you're not really gonna attend the meetings on a regular basis, it's a waste of time.
Well, I would say, unfortunately, two of the members of the Medicaid Advisory Board have been sick.
Right, so maybe that needs to be,
Yeah.
Well, and the broader kind of topic, which I'll make note of, what I'm doing is making notes of things that also relate to our overall charge, which is what things need to be reviewed and maybe changed and how they might be changed in a recommendation. So one of it is the advisory boards and whether there's a commitment issue. So that would be something, okay, so just using this as an example, John, we'll have a list of these things, and then we'll sit down and talk about, okay, well, how do we identify whether there really is a problem and to what extent it's a problem, so we know, one, what it is and the extent of it.
Right.
And then two, we can try and formulate a recommendation. So in this instance, we would, not at this point, I'm not asking you now, but giving you an example, we would come to you and say, hey, John, one of the concerns that was brought up, and it seems to be anecdotally supported by our own experiences, is that some of the advisory boards have kind of they don't always typically develop a quorum.
Yeah.
And we'd like to kind of figure out if that's really the case and then the root of it. And that would be an example of like one of the next steps of all the different items on our list before we can make a recommendation.
Right.
Because we need to identify what a problem is, the extent of the problem. Maybe it's that, there may be an underlying issue. Maybe, I'm not
well, I
suggesting
think he's
this.
right, some people are sick.
Well, I know,
Two
but
of
like,
their members have been, unfortunately.
but there've been like historic advisory, we haven't had quorums.
No, it's not just Nantucket. That's why the bigger picture for me is what is their role?
Yep.
Because we do defer to them. And for instance, that thing that came in from Nantucket for the newest Nantucket application that came in with the multiple houses, we've referred them to MAB, and now they're at a standstill because there's no group.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing, but I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Can the applications that need to be reviewed by these Nantucket group electronically go to them and they email their input rather than have to physically be together? Or is that against the open law?
It's a tricky one. It's always hard with email. They can always kind of submit their comments individually.
I just didn't know if that was a potential solution and maybe people would give more input, but I think I know the answer to that is probably no.
It's really tough.
I have a question. How many are on a Nantucket advisory board?
I don't know.
I need to look into their term.
You don't want to jump on, it shouldn't be more than 5 people,
Right.
because, too many people on a committee get nothing done.
Mm-hmm.
Limited to 5 members that want to apply,
All of them are 5.
Yeah. Go with that, and if they make recommendations like they have been doing, let them do it,
But they haven't met for several weeks now, and so things are at a standstill. So we're just,
We'll check back in, I think.
We'll have to
I
ask
think
them.
one of them's
Yeah.
doing better now. Brad was off island for a while, but I believe he's back now. Looking into this right now, though, and just going off the guidelines and building the Nantucket mind, just looking at Terry's stuff, but things are coming to mind. Fenestration. Maybe there's, in my experiences, I see Nantucket with the sides of the house facing the water is like 80% glass. So maybe that needs to be like a 50% fenestration, and that needs to be a policy for Nantucket.
yeah, I don't know
Most of
too
the ones
many
that I see
have
are
that
kinda-
much glass.
Ones in Nantucket?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the new proposals are saying
Yeah, well,
it's 8 French doors and 10 sets of gang windows. Second floor decking could be the same exact thing.
Mhm.
Typically, people are wanting, so if things are adhered to the 30% deck rule, which is
Mhm.
a guideline, but maybe that's a policy in Connecticut.
Well, and so it's gonna be along those, using that as a specific, I think one of the things we're talking about is, institutionalizing these things so that they don't drift over time. And I think Mr. McLaughlin has a pretty strong opinion on that. And that some of these things need to be perhaps as reviewed by the commission and whomever interested parties are for public hearings. Some elements need to become, some things that are policy currently may not really be established. They're established through use, but they're not established by vote. So that needs to be reviewed. And then some things that policy needs to be defined, like how rigidly is it followed, how rigidly isn't it followed. It seems like there's a carve out for pretty much everything at the bottom of our rules and regulations that says that, you know, the HCC can make an exception, which I think is important to some extent. But I guess the point is, we need, I think amongst ourselves, part of this process is going to be to clarify what should be in a what a policy is and what falls under that heading versus a rule and what falls under that heading, and then the guidelines, and then what falls under that heading. And the guidelines to me seems more like a narrative. I mean, just jumping in on that, seems more like a narrative of what is allowed, what can be allowed, what's typically allowed, and it could be in the user manual format. There might even be next to each paragraph that explains something. There might be something that says guideline, rule, policy. You know, something so people understand how rigidly it is enforced. The point is that the bigger picture point is that one of the things I'm hoping we accomplish is consistency, and I mean consistency over the next 30 years. So that if it's a policy, the HCC needs to make it a determination, and I think the community, the HCC is an extension of the community, needs to make a decision on where the island's headed and what it's going to look like.
But if we're not included in other
I got you.
island boards'
The zoning
decisions, or even, you know, given an opportunity, then it's out of our control. We had a situation in our recent meeting where the zoning has made one decision and HDC is not on board for the most part with that decision.
Right, and I think, so taking that as an example, part of what our process is to do is to address that issue in a constructive way. So in a constructive way, part of the recommendation, I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not saying this is what is actually going to happen, I'm just using an example so you guys kind of see the bigger, longer term process here, as I see it at least, is constructive means we identify what all the different parts of the problem are, and we identify, is it a problem that it's height, is it a problem that maybe it's a certain height or it's too much of the building is allowed to be that height under zoning? Is it a problem that the HCC isn't being consulted and it makes the HCC's job more difficult? Is it a problem that it makes the applicant not understand exactly what is required of them between a board and a commission?
I think it creates a huge amount of confusion and animosity because people are led to believe one thing because the right hand believes this is what the rule is, and the left hand makes the ultimate decision, and they're not communicating.
So our recommendation is part of our recommendation, I believe, is going to be how that gets addressed, or what the process might look like to get that addressed. And it's not just going to be a simple one bullet item thing. It'll be several, you know, because we want to attack everything on a kind of multifaceted.
Well, I think one of our key things is going to be housing projects, large developments, that sort of thing moving forward. And if we are not invited to add our 2 cents or our input before the RFP or in the RFP decision process, it's going to, again, cause an applicant to have 6-7 months of process.
Or the result, the product of our work and what the HCC does as a result is so good and so comprehensive that they can a developer can literally be directed to the Nantucket, building with Nantucket in mind, and and the RFP can state that it must be in conformance, and there will be things that say these are allowed and these are prohibited. And these are things where we may give you some room to work with in exchange for doing something else. So for instance, if it's a 40-foot height zone, the HCC may come up with some type of a policy or a rule or a guideline, depending on how everything gets defined. Again, this is just an example for you folks at home. We're going to be, that says that, yeah, you may be able to have a certain height, but it's not over the, it's a certain square footage of the ground coverage. And certain additive masses is required. 50% of the volume of the structure needs to be additive mass. You know what I mean? Like, there are ways that the HCC can take control of that process and be very clear about it by saying, yeah, we'll let you go up a little bit here, but you need to go out and around, and down and here. You need to make it not nondescript. It needs to be a visually interesting building. So, but it's not going to be an easy process. We're not going to do it all here today, and we're not going to do it all here, period. I'm just saying that.
No, that's why something as general as just a height creates issues.
Yes, I totally agree with that, and I think it's going to be one of those. It's definitely high on the list of things to address. Fenestration, John mentions fenestration and Nantucket as a concern and one way to deal with it. There may be other ways to deal with those things. The thing is that we're just kind of spinning our wheels right now because we're not getting feedback from Advisory Board of Nantucket. We're waiting on feedback from our commission members, and it's difficult for me because I know you guys are chomping at the bit to get something done here, and I keep having to kind of restrain us about going down a path because we could talk about these individual items and talk about them in great detail, but until we get more information, I think it's kind of it's not totally moot, but there will be a kind of a duplication, if not triplication, of our efforts later on. So what do we want to do with Nantucket Advisory? One of the things I just want to say is, and I just want to recap, for the list, we have generally advisory board questions, whether there's a commitment issue, re-identifying the roles, their process, including responsibilities, whether technology could help both them and staff. And Nantucket, apparently I understand there's 5 on each of those boards. Maybe there's a question of whether at this point in time that makes sense. Is it that it should be a 3-member board or something along those lines? I'm not suggesting that, but those would be questions that come up. Like if they're not developing a quorum, do they need a quorum, a lower number to have a lower quorum, so we can still get stuff without holding people up?
Or can they do online
technology help.
group
Right.
chat? It's a visual though, like everybody kind of logs in and.
And this is, I didn't want to poo-poo Jesse's idea last night because I think it could be helpful. There's specific rules about remote meetings, and they all anticipate, my understanding, that the central group will meet in a public forum and that someone may call in or someone's may call in, but it's kind of restricted. I don't know that they get into the detail of like cloud-based interactive chat room type stuff, but everything I know about that law, that from the seminars we had to take and then the follow-ups I've submitted to the Attorney General's office, is that it's not something they allow.
I'm just trying to come up with ways to get more consistent
No, I get you.
input.
But my point is that's going to be something that we're going to look at in detail on a topic by topic level, whether technology can help. Okay, so as a result of that, it will be, we have a topic, maybe we need to talk to John or Andrew or Leslie, whomever. I mean, frankly, the access to town council is going to be one thing we're going to need at some point. And we're going to have a group of things, and one of them will be what restrictions exist on using technology to facilitate meetings remotely. For instance, and we could give them 5 examples of what we think would be helpful for the advisory boards. Can they meet in a public chat room that's hosted on the town's website via text or via Skype, and it's recorded there versus here? So, I mean, so we'll go through that, and that exercise will include, okay, what options are realistic or practical, and then are there legalities? What does the staff think about having to manage them? What does the advisory board maybe think about using them? And then for that one, we'd be able to give a recommendation to the commission to vote on how they want to proceed. Oh, well, we see that we can do this, this, and this legally. We see the advisory boards want to participate in any of these three ways. We see this works for staff in any of these three ways. What do we as the HTC, the governing body, feel is the best way to move forward? And do we do it permanently or is it a trial basis? Okay, let's do this on a trial basis. And they can vote on the recommendation, and that one's off our list. So that's how I'm seeing that unfold using a specific example.
I would like to go back to something.
Yes, please.
Okay, I have here, I'm just letting you know where I'm gonna come from in the future. Is here is a map that I myself went over and talked to a couple of people, and it picks up, this map includes Tuckanuck and Muskegon Island. It starts from the northern side of Tuckanuck, down, right down to the Nantucket Road, over here, up, Boatyard, and it cuts across here to pick up a few of these lots right here, and it goes over, to Diana's Road, right to the water, covers Eel Point, because you can't build on Eel Point. And as far as I'm concerned, the only thing that has any historic value in this one area right here is what Fisher's Landing is. The only thing in that subdivision right there now is the farmhouse that was there when it was a farm. All of this was farms. You know, I got the map home. Anyway, they're all farms, so there's nothing historical in there that you can put in there. You know,
I
one area,
agree,
so
I
why-
don't
why-
think it
why
should be
pick it up when we
included.
don't need it?
Right.
So I-
As a district?
As a district, out of the district, you leave it out of there because it's all built up. Most every lot in there sold. So I'm just going to.
Well, can I answer your question?
Sure.
Well, so one of the reasons we might want to do that is because, you know, historically on Nantucket, things get picked up, things get moved. Houses, basically the houses that are on a street today and the streetscape they create could be completely different in 20 or 30 years, depending on where the money moves.
Okay.
So the reason would be to address what can be there in the future so that it mimics the historical patterns and characteristics of that area in context.
Immediate surroundings.
Right, but to your point, it may not qualify as a historic district, or it may be so small that we could just deal with rules. A rule, the Nantucket area rules may be that if you were on this street, this street, or this street, on this block, on either side of this, of any of those streets directly abutting, then these rules apply to you specifically. Like, and I don't know, that, again, so that might be an idea that comes out as an actual idea. But part of that will be, is it legal? If it is legal, how does it get done? Is it something that the Nantucket Advisory Board supports? You know what I mean? So like each concept that we settle on an idea will have a series of little things to take care of. But you make a good point, does it make sense to even have one there if there's only a very small area that's actually considered historic? And then when would you consider date-wise that goes back to? What do you think the oldest building in Nantucket is? Contributing.
Skin in, right?
You'll skin in, that's, those the oldest, is one
Yeah.
older is the Coast Guard building.
And how old do you think those
Where
are?
the fire department is out there now.
Yeah.
That building must be, they use that as a boathouse over on Mass Avenue, whatever the furthest one north, across Millie's Bridge. It was there, but they moved it from another place to where it is now. They gave it to the town, they used it for a ticketing place to go to Eel Point.
Yeah.
So anyway, I wouldn't say it was that old. Coast Guard has research on it down the Coast Guard.
What, 1900s? It's 30s, 1930s?
I'd say, well, if it was used as a lifeboat
It would be
station
before the
with a
30s.
lifeboat inside out of the weather, and you take it out when you need it. Now, the history on that is something that's gotta be looked into, but I say, that's the only way you can get the age of that building.
But I'm not gonna hold you to it, but just a guesstimate, what do you think?
It could be late 1800, 19, up to 1920,
Yeah,
you say.
I think you're right.
Anyway, that's enough on that. I wanna go to this here. This is Nantucket colors, okay? This was voted in 1992 or 3. Anyway, this shows you color doors, wood fences, and that. That we should get into in the old historic area of Nantucket, as I'm gonna call it that for now. And the other thing is this appendix here, which is referral to 1993. This breaks down everything, roofs, dormers, skylights, scuttles, everything you're gonna do. All you do is take something like this, go over this item for item. Do you wanna leave it the way it is, or change something for Nantucket only, where we got it mapped out? Go by whatever it says in Nantucket. You wanna change something, fine. Once you get this finalized, you can move forward, and then take the map, you know, we do our homework here, and then we come up with our own plan and present it to the, that we're gonna add a new historic district area called the Nantucket Historic District Area. And then what the process of it is, once you do it, you finalize it, say, this, we're gonna present this at town meeting for a change in the state law. And you get a lawyer to work with you, change it over to the state law, and say, we wanna eliminate this and do this. We're gonna make a hell of a lot of change if we do this. Here can save a lot of time of guesswork when somebody says, well, I want something, like the guy wanted that upstairs window last night with the lintel on it, you know? It's an oddity, you know, to me. And I say, you think about that, here it says, oh, it's not in here, can't have it. People can read this and look at what they want. Now, that architect that sat there on that project last night, the way he was talking, as though his shit didn't stink. That's what my opinion. Anyway, I'm saying, so.
He seemed nervous to me.
If you do one thing at a time, one is announce it, we're working on an old Nantucket area. Now, people are gonna be upset out there. What do you mean by that? We're not through yet. We'll present
John,
it when we get ready.
I gotta interrupt you.
Go ahead.
That's not something we can do. We're gonna have our hands full doing the bigger picture stuff.
Yeah.
My suggestion would be that you meet with the Nantucket Advisory Group, or the Nantucket Advisory Board. It's a board or a group?
It's a board.
Okay, so thank you. You meet with you would meet at the Nantucket Advisory Board as a member of our group to kind of marshal their thoughts and organize their thoughts and have them produce what you're talking about there to bring to us.
Right.
We review it, preview it, add some thoughts based on our experience as commission members and sitting for 4 hours or 5 hours a week over the last however many years each of you have been there. And so we know what they might approve and what they might have other concerns about, and then we make a recommendation. There needs to be somebody who does that legwork other than you and us. And I think it should be the Nantucket Advisory Board, because they also need to be getting people in Nantucket informed and get their input. That's how I think we should handle that. The other thing I'm not clear on is that, did you say that, I thought you said that you felt that the area maybe in Nantucket may be too small to be a district. So should these rules and stuff apply to the Nantucket area or to a district, or both?
Whatever you got circled here, that's the Nantucket Historic District.
Okay.
Like Wisconsin and Nantucket. So you got 3 historic districts, basically. You say, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna take these apart, put this back together. Both of these. That's what we think would be suitable for approvals on the general run.
Okay.
Of it, you know, without going into exorbitant. Well, I want 2.5 stories because there's one over there, you know, quarter of a mile away. That's out. You just talk, no, that's out.
Sure, no, I understand the point. I think it's a valid.
Well, when we do it, you know, we gotta make sure it's in black and white and voted by this board. You know.
And then town meeting if it goes that far.
You know,
So,
but I say, getting it ready, right now, this is an area which I think is appropriate, in my opinion. Anybody else in mind? I think that's appropriate to cover the Nantucket area. As far as anything old that's gonna be in this area here, or it's not gonna be. It can't be over near the bridge, can't be down here, An old barn down in the field doesn't mean that it's historic.
No, I got you, but
I'm just saying, you know, first we should do is work on the map
okay,
of
so,
what we think.
so
and
this
go
is,
from there.
this is,
Rules and regulations, and send it to the committee, but first you gotta find your committee of 5 members. No matter who wants to be on it. Anybody in Nantucket, put your name in.
right, well, I think we have, okay, so we have a resource that the HCC relies on, and I think that we need to be careful. They are volunteers. I understand that there's been some health issues and different things, so they're not necessarily meeting all the time. And of course, life happens, and you can't always be at meetings. I get that. But they are volunteers. They are interested in the historic district, the historic aspects and the architecture of Nantucket. I think it kind of behooves us for a number of reasons to rely on them, at least in part, as part of that committee or work group. I would suggest, as opposed to saying, okay, there's 2 different ways to approach what you're talking about, in my mind. And then lay them out there for you guys to think about, and let's discuss. And try and come up with a decision on it, so that something, maybe we can move forward. There's 2 different ways to do what you're doing, and I would suggest that one of them is the alternative if the first one doesn't work. The first one is to work with MAB. You go out there, you meet with MAB, you go through this, spend a couple hours with them, literally as working through this stuff. Getting information from them, documenting it. Now, whether they put it together on paper or you put it together on paper is up to you. You bring that back to us, we review it, see if we have any questions. If we have any questions, we get them answered. If we don't have any questions, we move forward with trying to put together a recommendation. Now, all of that is predicated on the fact that the MAB people, I would think, would want to be doing some type of public outreach. And there is the Nantucket Area Association, maybe not using the name
They have
correctly.
2 different ones.
So maybe they would meet with them first and talk about what they're trying to do, or maybe you would go and you would talk about what you're trying to do on their behalf with the HTC and come up with some input and then bring it back, then work with MAB to distill it into a few pieces of paper, which is a map, some rules, some guidelines as proposed, 2 maps. One is the area and one is the historic district. So there's that side of it. The other way to do it is instead to set up a committee, invite the MAB members, put out letters of interests, and then do the exact same process. Because that's really, it may not be exactly, but it's going to be the same process. You're going to want to get feedback from the people in Nantucket. You're going to want to get feedback from people everywhere. That's why public hearings would be involved on Nantucket. Either way it goes, you're going to want to get the feedback from the interested parties. Some are more interested than others, the most interested being in Nantucket, probably. Stuff needs to be put down on paper, the map, the proposed guidelines, and the proposed rules and regulations, and then it gets brought back here. Frankly, I think the more expeditious way to do it is to be working with MAB and have them do the outreach. I don't think we have staff resources that can be working to put together letters of interest for committees and so on and so forth. And then following through and coordinating another committee or work group at this point. I think that at some point that's part of where this is going to go. But the reason I would suggest the first solution is because clearly there's pressure from the Nantucket Advisory Board to get something on paper. And just because it's on paper now doesn't mean that it can't change in the future. We're not saying that this is how it is for the next 10, 15, 20 years. We're just saying we're getting started. We want to get something on the books. Our recommendation is to get something on the books and then review it and see how it's working. Maybe for the first couple of years, everything gets reviewed once a year.
Okay, this will all break down to one thing at the end of it, a final analysis.
Yep.
Everything that we do will come over here, and that's the end results of what we think is right. Then you have a public hearing,
Yep.
Maybe 2 public hearings, people put the input, and then you go to town meeting.
Right. So our final analysis, and give me, if you guys think it's different, that's why I mentioned it, I want to get your input. Our final analysis in this or any other topic will result in a recommendation to the HDC, the full HDC. And then they'll decide what to do with it. And they may decide, just as we're talking about, that they want to adopt these things and bring them to town meeting. So part of our analysis part of our recommendation will include what's involved in doing what we're recommending. Do we go to town? You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna not just send them an idea. We're gonna send them an idea that is fully with all the due diligence. We've looked at the legalities of what's being recommended. We've looked at the legal procedures. We've looked at all the rest of it. Does that make sense? But again, to do any of that using the Nantucket area and the Nantucket Historic District as the examples, it needs to start in this instance with MAB, I think, and you, because you've done the work, some of it already. You've structured it, you've given it a framework. Sitting down and putting something together. What do you think about that?
I think you're right. In the right direction, we'll end up with that final point. I agree, you know. I want to bring something while I'm thinking, okay?
Yep.
The biggest problem we have, I think, right here, is the planning board is still interfering with us because the planning regulations have nothing to do with HDC. And they keep throwing stuff out of town meet, different articles and stuff, which hampers us.
Okay.
Because they think they're in the right spot. They can't interfere with this commission.
Well, we were just talking about that, trying to come to some sort of
So,
collaborative effort.
right.
The two of them will never get along together. I can see that. I've seen it for 18 years on the planning board also. I've seen it go downhill. But I have one other question.
Can I respond? Or
Yeah.
Go ahead and I'll go back.
30-foot max was for years. 30 foot. And then they said, well, it's a little drop on the land here, so you're allowed 5 feet here. You know, they went into detail. You know, should have left it alone. But anyway, where is this 40-foot rule you just mentioned coming from? Town meeting.
So, okay, let's back up a couple of things, and I'll do it in reverse. That 40-foot is a town bylaw voted by town meeting. So the citizens of Nantucket who attended the town meeting accepted the concept that for a certain area, an overlay district, that where it's commercial and kind of mixed use, in my recollection, they would allow structures, not a whole structure, but a structure to have a 40-foot high maximum height. Part of that relates to the fact that it's mixed use, so there's residential, and the idea is to have additional floors, higher density in areas that the town already has sewer and water and public transportation and foot traffic. And when I say public transportation, I don't mean necessarily like a bus. I mean there's roads in place that are public. There's sidewalks in place that are public. There is the bus sometime, you know, depending on its annual schedule or what portion of the year. There are bike paths. So that was the concept, to my understanding. I think it's fairly accurate. I understand the HCC's concern that it doesn't jive, and the things we've talked about, it makes it very difficult for an applicant to understand that the HCC doesn't agree with that. Okay, so, but let's back up a little bit more. Part of what we're gonna do, we use the Nantucket as an example, right? Steps to take. This is the same thing. This is just one of probably 50 things on our list for recommendations. How do the planning board and the HDC work together constructively to protect the historic character and architecture, which, if you read the act, part of the HDC's responsibility is an economic driver for the community, to preserve the economic integrity of what those things bring. We preserve them because we should preserve them, it's the right thing to do, but we also preserve them because they are, in many, many ways, what makes Nantucket attractive. Not, you know, there's beaches, there's all the rest of the stuff. I'm just talking about the HDC
Nobody goes to the beach
stuff.
anymore, everybody has a pool.
Everybody has a pool and
They
an
go to
AC.
the beach, unfortunately.
So, anyways,
Wish they did.
The planning board, I don't think I don't personally, and you can think what you want, I'm not here to sell anybody anything. I don't think it's beneficial for us to look at them as an adversary. I think we need to look for where we have common grounds, where we have common ground with the NP and EDC and with planning staff, and try and come up with solutions. And when we get to the issue of the particular topic of the 40-foot, which I think is one, and then there'll be the bigger one of how do we work together constructively to accomplish other goals, then we'll get into that now. Then we'll get into it. You can bring it up as much as you want. I'm going to tell you the same thing every time, or pretty much the same thing. Yeah, we need to be working constructively. It's one of our topics. It's not something we're just pushing under the rug. It's just not something we can address yet because we aren't in that process. We aren't in that stage of our process. Where we are in the stage of our process is Nantucket Advisory Board came to us with some information. We need to bring it to a head one way or the other to make a recommendation to the full commission. I would prefer that instead of saying we got some maps, we don't have enough to really to do anything with, our recommendation is we not do anything right now. I would prefer that, we decide that it's a good idea, or at least a functional idea, to start working with the Nantucket Advisory Board on the path we've discussed and you've got the paperwork for, and have you volunteer to do that, and then have John organize it, like set up the first meeting. That's what I would prefer to do.
I have a question.
Yes,
with
please.
regard to that. Would it behoove us to send our advisory boards the questionnaire?
Yes and no. I think as a broader thing, when we start to deal with advisory board, let me think that through. You're saying with respect to the overall topics list?
Well, maybe not. Maybe it's abbreviated, but some sort of thing to get some input from them and get them to start organizing their thoughts as opposed to us doing everything.
Well, this is the thing is, okay, on the one hand, the more information we get sometimes is not always better. And then part of that is what information we get, we need to be able to categorize, organize in a way that it can be used intelligently. And I don't know, okay, so there's that aspect of it, and that means basically me.
Well,
you know what I mean?
But we're giving Nantucket an opportunity to give input, but...
Well, Nantucket has come to us searching for something where I think the Historic Advisory Board has the rules and regulations in place. Wisconsin Historic District has those in place. But then when we review the bigger picture of those, you know what I mean? Then we would ask for their feedback.
Okay.
So I'm not saying I think it's a bad idea. I'm just saying I think at this point it's kind of a different process. Because Nantucket is they're jumping the line in a way. We're not ready to be doing this. What we're ready to be doing is getting the rest of the topics from our commission members and trying to organize it. Instead, we've got the Nantucket thing that we're going to try and address because it's a pressing issue for them. I think that the forms that you're talking about getting to the other advisory boards is a good idea. It's just that I think we would do that when we take up those topics.
Okay.
Because right now we're kind of distracted from taking up those topics.
Yeah, and I still am overwhelmed with the task.
I'm trying to help.
I know.
So, okay, so let me put that in context as an example, right? One of the things will be advisory boards, commitments, responsibilities, and roles. One of our recommendations will be that they complete one of those forms, or a different form that has that and probably a bunch of other questions on it, so that before we make a recommendation, we get their feedback. So that's the other reason I think it would be a different type of a questionnaire to some extent. And then we'd want it to happen in sequence. Where Nantucket, what we're really trying to do then is kickstart them into producing something we can work with for rules, regulations, and guides for an area map and a district. So I think they're kind of two different things. Does that help? Does that answer your question at all, your concern?
Yeah, it's just a lot.
Yeah, it is, and that's why I'm also trying to chunk it down. If we get information from them right now, it's just gonna sit in a folder, because we're not ready to do anything with it.
I have one comment.
Yep.
We have, in my mind, because I've been around a hell of a lot, a problem which can't be rectified. Okay? I'm just making a statement.
Lossless? Are you talking about those images that you can't,
Talking about
John?
the problem. All right,
Okay.
you don't see it because most people aren't as, we'll say, strong-willed as I am about something when they get involved.
Okay,
And I find it, just
John,
problems. Okay.
I understand your comment, I appreciate that you have a point of view on it, but we're not here to pick out individuals
No,
or
that's right.
talk about individuals or have concern, you know what I mean? Our concerns are bigger than an individual level. Our concerns are about the big picture for Nantucket
Right.
through 2050 and beyond. It's not about what we individually may think about one person or a group of people. It's about how do we work better together, individually, on the commission, amongst ourselves here today and in the future, and with the planning board, and with the advisory boards, and with the applicants and stuff. So I understand your point, but I'm just gonna say, I don't think it's not appropriate, and it's not really what we're focusing on.
I'm saying that, I'm saying the future. 20 years from now, when I'm dead and gone, you'll be sitting here saying, no, it's all me.
All right, I'll concede, maybe I will.
Anyway, what do you want to do now? Do you want to start with
Do you want to?
notifying this Nantucket advisory committee if we still got one? And we want to meet with them first and tell them what our main intention is, just to get a new area. And have a meeting, and have a feedback on it with them, tell them what we think, tell them what we all think, and tell them we're going to proceed with, first, we're going to work on, say, the Nantucket map. That's the most important.
I think it's a good idea, except for we don't need to meet with them again. You need to meet with them. I think you need to meet with them and just say,
The four of us.
no, I think you should sit down with them and say, we need to finish this up. We need to start and finish this. Here's the map for the area. Let's discuss it and come up with a consensus you all as the advisory board believe in and I can support. I think you need to listen to them. It is their area. But if they, try and get consensus on the area map, try and get consensus on the district map, come up with rules, just the way you showed. This is a good one, this is a bad one, and then any other ones they think of, and then bring it back to us so that we can do something with it. We can meet with them, but all we're going to do is tell them what you're going to tell them, which is we need to finalize consensus on a map. We need to we being the Nantucket Area Advisory Board, needs to finalize consensus on a map for the area, for the district, get some rules and regulations and guidelines on paper. They need to do that before we can do anything else. They could come here and we could talk to them about it, but we're wasting time. Let's just do it.
Right.
You're equipped to do it. You got some checklists, you got some other sheets.
But just so we're all up to speed, those that can make the meeting out of the four of us should be there if I'm gonna do it. I think they should be there to, because this is putting me on the, not that I give a damn, to put me on the spot as to the starter of this. I'm not the starter, it's there.
Well,
So this is what we gotta do.
But this is the crux of the
Work
problem.
together.
This is the crux, I gotta interrupt you, because this is the crux of the issue. We're not the starters, but they're not starting. They're starting, but they're not following through.
Not doing
And I
it.
understand they have other stuff going on, I get that. But we can't just work with a map and one member of the public's input, however good it is. We need to hear from the Nantucket Advisory Board. And we need to hear from them in the way we discussed, which is get us some proposed guidelines, rules, and regulations that have meat, not 25 feet, 1.5 story. You're gonna have unintended consequences. I'm not gonna recommend something that's gonna make Nantucket look like Huntington homes everywhere. The big 2-story ones that are, you know, or a story and a half, and they're, you know what I mean? Like, nothing against Huntington homes. I don't mean it that way. I'm just using an example of, I shouldn't even say Huntington homes. The old style modulars were just a box.
Right.
That's what we're not trying to promote in Nantucket. So let's not start by promoting that, by having the rules be 25 feet and a 1.5 story tall, because that's what we're gonna end up with. I mean, because think about it, 1.5 story in 25 feet is, like, that's a big box when you're in Nantucket zoning.
If that's
Fairly
the
nice
only,
designs come through from.
Yeah, no, and I didn't mean to,
Some certain designers.
yeah, and I don't mean to,
Massey and stuff.
but in Nantucket, I'm using that, I'm not judging anyone's design or home, including the manufacturer. My apologies to Huntington. I'm simply saying that the reference of a modular home sometimes is that it's a box.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Nantucket is not that. If anything, Nantucket is 180
Small boxes.
degrees. Yeah, small boxes, real simple boxes, or small boxes put together. So all I'm saying is, I don't think we want to be going to the commission and saying, hey, 25 feet and 1.5 story, we're good to go, here's the maps. Like, we're not doing our jobs if we do that.
I'll go back to something, you mentioned the word modular. The first 2 modulars that hit Nantucket on trailers, all right? If you're coming from Hooper Farm Road out to Surfside Road, you can turn right to go to the school. That first house right there is a ranch-style 6-inch roof pitch, which was allowed at the time. That's one, and the other one is over on off Bartlett Road. The first 2 modules come to the island. They worked fine. They put them up together, had them up in 2 days, you know?
Yeah.
All put together. But those are the modular homes that made me think of when you said it. If you want to see what they were, that's where they are.
Right.
Yeah.
One, again, I got nothing against modulars. 2, those are not what would be built in Nantucket under 25 feet, 1.5 story rules. They would be 12 pitch with like a 3.5 foot knee wall to get under the 3 foot, 11.5 inch knee wall to get under the guideline that 1 3/4 story, or whatever we call a 4 foot knee wall, takes it up a notch to a 2 story or 1 3/4 story. It would be a completely different thing. It would just be a big box, and I think that's what we're trying to get away from. The other thing is, you know, and this goes to the idea of the policy, the procedures, and how we need, I think, at least insofar as I'm concerned, to develop and build consistency into the whole process, so that any member here can sit and say, wait a minute, that's against our policy, or that's against our guideline, or that's against our rule. And in fact, it's their responsibility. The example being, and I got nothing against ranch houses. I live in a ranch house. I grew up in a ranch house, but I'm using the example. Many ranches have 6 over 12 pitch roofs. That's not in the guidelines as approvable. It's not in the rural area guidelines as approvable. However, you wouldn't have Hooper Farm Road and Waydale Road and any of those of the older construction. They would never have been approved, and the HDC was in fact in place when those structures were built. So one of the things we're looking to do through this whole process is set up a system so that it's consistent. So the applicant out there comes in and knows they're being treated fairly, and it's not, in their perception, somebody knows somebody or somebody doesn't know somebody. My perception, it's more, sometimes somebody comes in and they present something with a more compelling story, and maybe that gets approved a little bit more than someone else. I want to build consistency in. I'm just bringing up an example of one of the things that I'm concerned about. I want to get back to this Nantucket thing because we're kind of spinning our wheels. We want to be more productive in these meetings, and then I think we can probably wrap it up after you guys each have a chance
Excuse
to.
me, while you brought it up, I didn't. Nantucket, 1.5 story under 25 feet.
That's what Brad said, right?
I'm saying if you brought it, I remember you brought it up here today.
Well, Brad Fleming brought it up to us
Okay.
as what they recommended.
Oh, okay, fine. I just want to go with that, you know, move my train of thought. If that's gonna be discussed to the Nantucket people, you know, in a meeting with me, myself, and them, and say all four of us, we meet. If I'm gonna talk on this, you know, I want them to fully know that story and a half is a nice thing to have. You know, I agree, under 25 feet.
But it's not enough,
Right.
Oops, sorry.
because if it is only 25, if it is 25 feet, 1.5 story, what's gonna happen?
Thomas,
Big boxes.
yeah.
So you gotta have some other rules and some other guidelines in place. That's all we're saying.
Well, additive massing is huge.
Yeah,
And that, I think,
yeah. So, okay, so, John, I think, I wanna go back, this whole thing with Nantucket Advisory Board. My suggestion is, you meet with Nantucket Advisory Board. They meet with the people in Nantucket. You don't have to go to downstairs and have a big meeting that's on TV and at the auditorium, and, you know what I mean? It has to be publicly noticed, but it's up to them to reach out to the Nantucket advisory groups
Yeah, okay.
that aren't part of the HDC. But
All right, yeah, no.
but if this is gonna go anywhere, one of us needs to coordinate it, and I can't be me, I'm coordinating the other stuff. If you want us to be there when you meet with Nantucket Advisory Board, I don't have a problem with it, but I think Brad knows what we're looking for. We met with him for 3 hours.
I spoke a few times as well.
Yeah.
I don't wanna go there and have Brad and others sitting there and they're putting words in my mouth either. I don't speak for myself.
Right. Well, and that's why I think it's important that Brad be there. Val, would you have a problem meeting with them? Do you have schedule-wise?
I'm not gonna say yes to everything. If I have time when it's determined, of course I'll go, but I
Okay.
feel like I'm over scheduled as it is.
I know that feeling.
It hurts to hear you say that.
So
I'm glad.
what I would suggest then to move this topic along so we can get out of here is, John,
Yeah.
will you
When
meet?
do they meet?
I don't know.
Oh,
They meet the weeks of new business. They meet at 9 in the morning, Tuesdays of HDC meetings.
John, would you be willing to meet with Nantucket Advisory Board either this Tuesday or next Tuesday morning
Yeah.
to tell them what we need based on what you have there?
Right.
Okay.
Well, tell me what we look forward to, some changes, you know, but
Right.
that page, they'll get the mouthful of it, yeah.
Right. Do you guys think that would be productive to do it that way, or do you think we should do it a different way?
no, I think that's, if they're gonna convene, maybe we shoot them an email and say there'll be some representatives there to help facilitate this ball rolling, but we do need input from you.
Yeah, organized input.
I can, as well, I can do that.
Okay. So,
You can be there, John, right?
Yeah. Oh,
so John, would you,
Nice to have you.
John H., would you be so kind then to, I want to clarify a couple things. One, I believe it's within our purview to reach out to other people for this type of thing. We were tasked by our chair with taking up the Nantucket advisory issue and making a recommendation.
mhm,
I will bring it up tomorrow at the meeting, just to make sure.
mhm.
But I would suggest that we have full authority to be meeting with them and discussing these things with them. Is that your,
Yeah.
okay, I just want to make sure,
Yeah.
because as chair, I'm also looking at procedural matters
I
in the
could
background.
have, I mean, we could post a meeting for you all being at their meeting.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, and then that way,
Or if just John goes, then the meeting needs to be posted
okay.
for this committee.
I was going to suggest then that you go ahead and post a meeting of us meeting with them to discuss the
Okay.
Nantucket area,
Yeah, yeah,
issues and matters of concern, Nantucket area.
right.
And then you would be there, and we would try and be there, and, the only thing is it doesn't make sense if they're not gonna have a quorum, it doesn't make sense if there's only gonna be 2 people there.
Mhm.
Like, we need to have a confirmed attendance, because if John goes there and tries to elicit information,
Mhm.
and there's not a quorum, then he's gonna have 1 or 2 people. There's 3 people, there's two people who are left out of the mix and then
Yeah.
follow-up.
Yeah.
So that's my only concern with that is that we meet when they have a full attendance.
Yeah,
They can call a meeting and invite us to go, and you don't need a quorum.
Well, we need to make a notice, if we're gonna have a quorum, which is two of us,
Yeah,
we have to notice the meeting also for us.
yeah, okay.
So just to be clear, the suggestion then is that John meets with them, we'll attend if we're free. I think we should plan on being there just to start it out if we can.
What did you call those things that go up the wall with the air conditioning?
Wait, a Dropbox.
Huh?
It's just-
Conduit?
line set.
the cover for it, yeah, Dropbox.
Dropbox,
Dropbox. It's just a,
DROP.
yeah, it's a cedar enclosure.
I keep forgetting it.
Okay.
Thank you.
John, can you make sure that, please, that can you post and then make sure that they're aware? How long do they normally meet? So say we do ours at 9:30 or 9:15 or
Yeah,
which,
I mean, we can just do it from the start,
and then we'll let them know we'll
Yeah.
show up a little bit
Yeah.
into it 9:15.
Yeah.
We should probably just show up so we're there.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna review probably many applications to have one big project that's gonna be on there,
Which one?
right here, East Street.
We've already looked at it and referred it to them because they didn't have a chance to look at it.
Do you want to be there for that?
Not necessarily, but I will if we need to be.
Well, I'm just wondering if we schedule for 9:30,
Yeah, that would probably.
but I just don't want to go in and disrupt their meeting too.
No, and I would rather not have input on that level.
Right.
Just be there for what we need to talk about.
So why don't we schedule for 9:30, and if,
This Tuesday?
yeah, and if they have but also find out and email me if they're gonna commit to have the full 5 members there.
Yeah, well, I mean, we sent
Or
out
at least the
when we post the
majority.
meeting on Thursday, Kathy sends out the email, so we usually hear back on Friday from home.
Okay. But what I'm asking you, and I'm being specific so that I'm clear with the expectation, is to ask them to please be there. And if they're not gonna be there, to let us know.
Yeah, I mean, they
Yeah.
email back and say, hey, when are you available? And we get their emails on Fridays usually. Either they send an email and say, yes, I'll be there, or they send an email and say, no.
Right, but I'm not being clear. What I'm asking is that you ask them to please be there for this what we're doing is trying to organize their area,
Yeah,
and that you can use my name, or you can use our group, we've asked that you please attend, because we won't be there if there's not full attendance.
right.
That's all. I
I'm
just wanna be
saying,
clear with
I mean,
them.
They've already volunteered, so we send them an agenda, we expect them to be present at the meeting. That's why.
I'm not sure what the disconnect is here. We're just trying to affirm that they're gonna be there and
And
not.
that's what I'm trying to say. We get emails back from them on Friday, either they say I can or I can't. That's our best way of reaching out to them and saying that they can make a meeting. I can't.
Right, no, I get that, but, you know, what happens a lot of times, I don't know if you sit on any of these boards or committees, you get an agenda, you don't read it. So
Yeah,
what
but
I'm
the
saying
email
is if
a
you.
reminder for them that there is a meeting coming
Right,
up.
and I'm asking you to point out that we are convening a meeting to address an issue that they've brought up as a serious concern.
Right, right.
So they're aware of it, aside from having it in the agenda, which they may never read until they get to the meeting.
Right, okay.
That's
I
what
think-
that's all I'm
yeah,
asking.
I got you.
I'm not asking you to chase them down and
Well, yeah, that's.
put a sugar trail down or anything like that. No, I'm just please let them know that
You
it's,
are gonna be there.
it's a special meeting to address their
Gotcha.
issue, that's
We'll
all.
include that in the email.
That's all I'd ask, because otherwise they may never read the agenda.
Right.
And then it's like,
Gotcha.
we're never gonna meet with them. And if the goal is to meet with them and get through this,
Right, right.
so, okay.
I was just coming from the attendance kind of thing.
No, I got you. I misunderstood what you were saying. It finally clicked. Sometimes I'm a little dense.
No, not viewing the agendas part quick, but.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, is like sometimes people,
Right, I have a meeting, I know.
you get on a board or committee, and a lot of times unless it's like, so like for me, for instance, I typically don't look at the agenda, but I look at the view list.
Right, right.
And if one of these boards or committees doesn't have a view list preparation,
Right.
they'll send a packet.
Yeah.
It could just be in the tagline of the email.
Well, I'll just put.
Yeah,
just
I don't wanna
put it
get,
in the
I'm not
email.
I'm not trying to
Because you're gonna be
micromanage you on
there
that.
Wanting to discuss this. So.
Yeah, not trying to micromanage you, just wanted to make sure it was highlighted.
I think we've discussed a lot today, Paris.
We've
Future.
discussed enough. I'm glad you think so. I sincerely.
Well, we all know we're on board and know what's gonna happen. We hope it's gonna happen.
And then and then that goes out, so that's a public notice, so if anyone's interested, and then John, you could bring up, we can bring up that they can reach out to other people, and we can give them a deadline to get back to us. I mean, I don't expect them to do it that day, but does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
And then based on what they think, if they wanna have other people come in,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, probably.
And then how does that work with their advisory board? Do they, can they solicit public input, or they're really just to review the HDC Matticat stuff? Or, I don't really know much about the.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically there to review applications. Sometimes applicants show up at their meetings to meet with them and go over things. That happens in Wisconsin, historic structures a lot,
Mhm.
People that are applying will go to those meetings and sit down with them and go over,
Mhm.
questions, concerns, comments and stuff like that. But
So if they were gonna meet, if they felt that there was a need, and I don't think that there is not a need, to reach out to the two Matticat advisory groups, the Matticat area advisory groups, how would you see that happening? Would it be under the auspice of the Matticat Advisory Board, or would it be something we would do through them, or? I'm just trying to think of how to do that the right way, because if the Matticat Advisory Board's mission or duty, or, its charge is to review Matticat area HDC applications,
yeah,
then maybe they shouldn't, maybe what we would do is rely on them for outreach,
right,
but it would be under our heading as a public notice.
right.
You don't need to answer it now, but if you can think about it, just so
Yeah.
we know Tuesday how to do it.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting we even need to do it, but, John, Mr. McLaughlin brought up the idea that there's two of you, so getting widespread input from that constituency group would be a good idea. So I just want to make sure we try and address
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
All to be forgotten tomorrow. Anything, just general comments, Dale, or specific?
With regard to
Anything.
Nantucket,
Anything's on our agenda. Bob? Commissioner comments, I think, is on there. If not, there's new business. You can fall under that.
no, I'm gonna wait until I have my,
Sheet together.
yeah.
Okay. John, any other comments?
Not at the time, no, step, wait and see what happens.
Mr. Hedden?
I think if we could switch major years, and tackle some smaller things, but are big as far as guideline things.
Roof shingles.
Before I even get into that one, because that's the next one, fences. If we could create a little guideline for fences, because I see a lot of fences coming in now, it would be great to have someone who can draw, a designer or someone. I keep harping back to the New Orleans Historic District and their guidelines, but it's very spelled out, it's very clear. It says, it doesn't give the height of their fences, but a fence that starts at the back corner of the fence and fences in the backyard is approvable. It's like highly approvable. Fences that start midway, less approvable, but yes. Ones that start at the front, not recommended, but sometimes approvable. Fences that come out to the street, not approvable, and it's that clear. It shows those 4 examples of the fences coming down, and we could show a 6-foot board fence is 5 and 1, type 2 picket, and just make a quick guideline with a site plan, and the types of fences. I think that we could put that on the website and also have it printed in our office. And same with roof shingles.
Okay, so any other on the fence part?
As far as details on the fence?
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to cut you off, I just wanna know before I make a comment.
No, that's about it. I mean,
Okay, no, I mean, that's a lot.
yeah. It's funny because we hear the fences make good neighbors thing. Been pointed out a lot that there weren't never fences before on Nantucket. I think there were great neighbors then instead of good ones.
Yeah,
I mean,
but-
so we're trying to get this privacy thing.
But,
Well,
so, go ahead, I'm sorry.
with regard to the applications that have come up that I've had reservations about, I don't think anything is as black and white as that, because
Yeah.
if
I
it
know.
was, then I think we're just gonna have this over proliferation of fences, and I get what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
could just
It's gotta be a case by case basis, because in town, a fence right on the street is perfectly fine.
Right.
I think the fences are getting higher
Yeah.
and more solid, and I would almost prefer, I know it's a cheaper way to maybe get some initial privacy, but I think that there's gonna have to be some sort of regulation about, or policy, and maybe it's driven by the development. I would like to contact the development I'm talking about,
Mm-hmm.
that there has to be a percentage of something. If you can have a
Right.
big chunk of fence, but you need to then supplement it with vegetation or something, otherwise,
right.
I'm really afraid that's gonna look very Stepford-like.
Right. And I mean.
And
part-
not even consistent fences. We
Right.
got a 6-foot board, we've got a 5-in-1, we've got a stockade, we've got,
Right. And I think it is tough because it's case by case. Sometimes the lots are kind of cornered
Right.
or angled, which makes it definitely a little bit different. If maybe the fence goes back a little bit and there's two trees, which are, two evergreen trees, which are definitely good, visibility.
Yeah.
Things.
And I think illustrations can help with that too, because it's not necessarily gonna be a plan or a section view showing a section and showing an elevation, but also a plan view that might illustrate the supplemental
Yeah.
type of planning and where fences are approvable and where they aren't, in
Right.
addition to the narrative. So again, this is gonna be, personally, I think it's a good idea. I'd like to do this with fences, with doors, with windows, with chimneys, with, a lot of stuff. And whether it's allowed or not, it may be that it's allowed by right in very few instances, but it gives people an idea, a very specific idea of what, like dormers.
Yeah.
Now dormers, I'm not gonna use dormers as an example, but I'm gonna use fences as an example. I think there's a distinct difference, and I'm guilty of this too, between what we recollect is the historical norm and what the historical norm was. And the historical norm for John is different because he recollects it growing up as a boy and what he saw than you or I. And yours from reading and so on and so forth. I mean, obviously you've been here, but you're reading it more every day than we are.
Right.
So that's the backdrop. Fences is the example. I've looked at a lot of pictures of the NHA. There's a lot of fences in town. I
In
personally
town, yeah.
think a fence is a good thing. Now, the thing is that they were in town because that's where you had the densification due to development. That's where you had homes close together, small yards, the necessity to hide utilitarian type devices in your own yard, so that everything looked nice to the neighbors, but at the same time you had privacy and you could run around in your bloomers and whatever. That densification has come out, and that's the Hooper Farm area. It's anything.
Mid-Island is getting,
I know, but that's one of our things on our list is Mid-Island. I'm gonna redo that list. Mid-Island. But anyways, the point is simply that fences were used for a certain purpose in certain dense areas. In other areas where the development wasn't as dense, they used split rail. Obviously, rural areas, you had bigger yards, you had space, you could put your stuff in a barn because you didn't have room for a barn downtown.
It was mostly to keep critters in.
Right. So, or that type of fence. So I guess this is, with that as the backdrop, I think a quick little guideline is a little, it still needs to go through the process. And the process would be, is that we would, okay, so we'll have a meeting and let's talk about fences. And everybody's gonna be tasked with a duty, like do your homework, go to the NHA, do some research. I don't care, wherever your research is. I'm not gonna suggest you go someplace in particular because we all want it to be a little bit different. We wanna bring flavor. It needs to be more than just our memories and what we see, because we're looking at the historical record to make, that's really what the charge is for the HDC, is to preserve that historical fabric and the character. So we need to look back at it, and that will inform, that I believe should inform our decision-making in terms of recommendation. To stick on the fences, we have a meeting, we discuss the things you brought up, other things, and over the course of a meeting or two, we kind of narrow it down and come up with a concrete recommendation about what should be included, maybe even how it should be presented, in terms of formatting and stuff.
Yeah.
And then we bring it to the full group. Because keep in mind, the full group is like us, except for even worse, in a way. You know what I mean? Like, they're looking at us like we're looking at Nantucket Advisory Board. We need to have something concrete to look at. Then we can pick it apart, we can make some changes, we can reinforce it, we can subtract a little bit here, and then we can vote on it. That's what we're gonna need to bring to them. Fences is gonna be one of those things. Now, in terms of chunking this down, John's talking about carving things out a little bit to address more pressing matters that come up that maybe take a lot of time for staff, for the HDC, or both. I'm not suggesting that every single topic would be addressed this way, where we do it individually and go to the HDC.
No.
I mean, just saying in the bigger picture, I'm saying this would be a good one, and I'm sure there's probably a couple other, like the application might be one, including the like kind, the rules and policies and procedures for the meeting.
Yeah.
Some of the shorter term goals, let's hit them and get out of the way individually and build up a head of steam for the bigger overall thing. Is that?
Yeah, and I mean, this is just a guideline for new people coming in with
Yeah.
an application.
And because
just so
there
they
seems
know.
to be a big push for
And-
them.
Yeah, and a shed, this is where a shed should be sited, the window should match, the trim
Right.
color should match,
Right.
This and that. So anyone that comes into our office can, this is what a site plan is, you need to mark on the site plan where the shed is going on your property.
Yeah.
And these would just be guidelines, a quick guide for people to grab in the office. Obviously, the commission is gonna go to a meeting, any shape or form, consent, review, new business.
Sure.
Consent, condition is still reviewed by the commission.
Well, the idea that I'm having here is that we build up a level of confidence in the process that establishes these little guidebooks, that some of these things are not, they don't have to come to us, to the commission. It would be more of a, it's in the backyard, it meets the requirement for backyard fences, there are 3 other categories of requirement, it meets 2 of 3, therefore it's approvable by staff. So that I'm also looking at it as not only to simplify to some extent what the applicant has to do and what you have to do, which is good, but as a template to build up confidence in how a lot of this stuff is done by the HDC, so that the HDC doesn't necessarily have to wade in on everything. And part of that would be developing through this and others confidence, and so that, like we do right now with consent, John reviews it, meets it, puts in a consent. Boom,
Well,
done.
but just to be clear, and once we have that, I think that can happen.
Yeah,
These fences that were before us this week
right.
could have been consentable, but I think they warranted a bigger discussion. It wasn't because I'm anti-fence.
No.
I just think, and maybe we contact the housing,
Right,
what
absolutely.
do you call it?
The homeowner association.
Right, and have them see if they come up, they must have a vision of what they like to see.
Right, and you brought up great points on it, and it's a precedent, as this whole
Right.
neighborhood's new. But we don't wanna end up with Wynn Street,
Yeah.
Look at an overlay of Wayne Street. 16 out of 19 lots right there have pools and fences
Yeah.
running through that lines.
And then look at Nashogwissett, which has privacy fences between many of the homes. But what I did as a designer was we initiated living walls and things on those lines. So you have berms with indigenous plant materials like cedar,
Mhm.
juniper, virginicanus, and so that, and Arrowwood viburnum, and deciduous and evergreen materials, so that you would have some fence, and then you have a built-up area that acts as a fence even when it doesn't have foliage in it because it's a little bit taller and it's a little denser.
Mhm.
So I'm with you. I think there needs to be a plan. The plan has to be about the little sub-community and the big community areas, and the community overall. We don't have to solve that problem in order to do what you want to do, but we have to solve some of it so that the commission has confidence and can let go a little bit. So I think it's going to be a little more involved in what you think, because I think, look, for instance, we're going to have discussions about where is a 6-foot board fence approvable versus a
Right.
5 and 1. And why don't we allow 5 and 2? Why don't we allow a 5 and 2, which creates a better sense of privacy, but actually proportionally, I would argue, looks more appropriate than a 5 and 1. But those are like discussion elements. I'm not suggesting we are going to solve them here.
Well, I think it raises a good question, a good point too, that we've been, we're gonna start to get developments and apartment complexes and all of that not one of those plans when they came in initially had any indication of what was gonna delineate those sites. And maybe on the front end from now on, that's a component.
I'm making a note.
Probably no thought when it came in, it would hedges, like.
Well, I brought in last
Yeah.
night
Yeah.
the images they had presented when they
Right,
came
right.
in, and there wasn't one fence.
Right.
It was all beautiful greenery.
Yeah. Which I think. a
But
lot
the
of
developer
developers
may be responsible for putting some of it in, you know what I mean, on the
Right,
front
right.
end.
Yeah, and there's, in those zoning developments, sometimes there are restrictions
Yeah.
on fences and driveways.
Going back to fences, it's a state police barracks, all right? If you're going up North Liberty Street, barracks on the right,
Mm-hmm.
one house on the corner, all right? And this is when we used to go back and you'd have 4-foot fences with max, a lot of it. And this guy, well, we come up with a formula. The house is maybe 12 feet back from his property line. And he run 6-foot fence along the state troopers down here. He said, you can run it down to the front of the house. From the front of the house, any house, or any structure forward, it's gotta be 4 feet until you hit the street over the public way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always stood, and the other thing was the fact that the state law, the guy had to wait, he took the town to task or not. The guy put up a fence, I think it was 7 foot. And the neighbor had a garden right up to his property line. He knew that son was blocking the sun on my property. They went to court and the son of the gun, the guy won. He said, you have no right to block me, If you wanna build a house 25 feet high, you got, well, now it's 5 feet on the side or 10 feet. But they should have made it longer, get it further away. But just the idea that the
It's a
fence.
zoning thing again, though.
But, okay, so, and again, I want to keep reiterating, because we haven't talked about it all yet, and I keep using examples. This is where it's a bigger, broader, deeper discussion, not to preclude what you want to do, but we want to, at some point in our recommendation, we're going to bring up, how do we address the fences in developments, in subdivisions, as a matter of a rule, as a matter of not just it's an area like downtown versus rural versus R5 zoning or R10. Maybe it's based on zoning because all the setbacks are based on the zoning. So, and the character of the different areas relates back to what the zoning is based on the setbacks and so on and so forth. So maybe that's one way we look at it. Maybe it just starts out more simply, so we get something done. But part of it will be, what are the policies for a subdivision coming in versus, or a development versus just one house? Should the development come in with a hardscape plan? Or should it be mandated to not have, the HDC feels that in a subdivision, there's only a certain amount of fencing? Is any of that
I
even
think-
legal? How does it all work out? I mean, we have to have discussions about that stuff
No,
too.
right. I think it's a different situation when it's a rental format, but when it's a sell, you know, to individual people, that's when it gets a little more complicated.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I'll use the housing project over here. They had to provide an overall hardscape, and you can hold them to that.
Right.
When it's developed to sell the individual lots, just maybe it's important to have them think about it ahead of time. A lot of times,
Right.
the higher end ones, they put hedges and all kinds of stuff like that, but the more affordable, I get it, it's to keep the cost down, but, well, we're all saying the same thing, it just needs to be thought about.
Yeah, and when I was saying mandates, I was talking
Yeah.
more about like like the workforce housing, like
Mm-hmm.
where it's one ownership entity that has control. I don't think
Right.
that, and the legalities of that I think are pretty clear, but I would say, I'm just saying we still need to, as part of a well-rounded policy, we would need to make sure we have what controls can we put in place. When it comes to subdivisions, in particular, with common areas we can do that, but individual homes totally different. But I think it's part of the discussion we have to have, and part of the bigger picture is how these things fit together. Fences, what are your top three, John? Fences?
Architectural roof shingles, the color. I mean, these are just quick, easy ones. Fences and sheds would be great. Those three, just a little guideline would be, you know, that would be posted on the website, or, you know, we can print out, have in our office, and then people would be.
Okay, so that's helpful, thank you. I think what we're going to do, what I'd like to suggest we do is, we're going to meet Tuesday. Thursday, hopefully we'll have more information from everyone. And then what I'm hoping we could do is next week meet and just kind of, John, what I'd like to do, just for clarity, is whatever we get Thursday, we'll turn into you.
Okay.
And
yeah.
you could scan them.
Yep.
I looked into this a little bit with open meeting law, because I'm not, look, I don't want to do your job. You don't want me to do your job. Well, maybe you do. But I'm looking into these things so that, to the extent I feel responsible, I have some clarity. And also so that we're not coming to you and saying, here, John, here's more stuff.
Right.
So anyways, I looked into the open meeting law on questionnaires and stuff like that. The policy, as I understand it, is we, individuals, I can send out forms till I'm blue in the face. Any one of us can send out blank forms.
Right.
You, as the staff, as our professional staff, are the one who should receive back the individual inputs.
Right.
And then you can aggregate them and present them to us all.
Yep.
And preferably at a public meeting, and it becomes part reference in the public record, and it's
Right.
in our public records at the office.
Right.
So that's the background.
Yep.
We're probably gonna be doing a bunch of these with different groups and things. So I wanted to be clear about that. So what I'm gonna ask is that Thursday, I'll give them to you. You know, hold on to Jesse's, you don't need to
Yeah.
send it. Just aggregate them all. When we get everyone's, if you could scan them into a packet,
Yeah.
and then we'll have it, and it's accessible to anyone ever requests it, and it's in the public
Right,
record.
right, yeah.
And then we'll each get a copy of them, and I'll get a copy, and then I can try and, I'll work on it.
Right.
So that's part of that for hopefully for next week. The other thing is, hopefully we'll have them all, and then we can review them. If we don't, we'll have a little bit of the Nantucket stuff to talk about. And then I'd like to talk about this, I think the general concept of what John's brought up is trying to chunk down some of the things that are more flashpoints in different ways for staff and for the commission when we sit and meet. And I personally support it. Clearly, architectural roof shingles is long overdue, but we do have a distributor from, I've resolved that. Whether they come through next week or not, I won't know. I kinda doubt it, so. What do you have in the office?
I have to excuse myself. I have to go to school for a 3:00 meeting.
Enjoy yourself. I know it's tough to get stuff done.
Yes.
We're just gonna find out what he has for architectural shingles, and then, I was just gonna say next meeting,
Yeah.
maybe we should talk about how we might be able to do a parallel track a little bit with getting together the whole list and organizing it and talking about those things and prioritizing them is what I prefer to do, but I don't wanna lose track of the things John brought up and putting them in the prioritization list kinda towards the top. And then try and use those as little projects where we can bite them off,
And check them off.
check, get some success, get the rest of the commission behind how the process is working, figure out if it's not working so we can fix it before we start doing a bigger list.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll talk
I
about.
think that sounds good.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's a great
So
way
we'll,
to go about
we'll
it.
talk about that more at our next meeting, along with the other topics on the list from what we get. Okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds good.
And then, John, before
Thank you,
I
Larry.
ask for a motion to,
Yes.
I just asked you, will you send me what you have, the list of what you have?
Yeah.
And whether it's three tab
Three.
by manufacturer, architectural by manufacturer, and then the color?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that, I
Yeah,
know you got other
I
stuff to
have a
do,
bunch.
but,
Yeah, we have a couple, a fair amount of them.
yeah, because
Thanks, you
I'm trying to
guys.
track these down, and I might be
Yeah, yeah.
holding off with stuff that you already have.
Okay, yeah, I'll send you what I do.
Okay. Great. So, motion adjourned?
Motion.
So moved. Voted unanimously. Okay.
Well,
All right.
I was gonna mention something,
Yeah.
self the records don't matter.
That's correct.
Well, actually, there's a,
The farms from 18,
Shut up the video.
oh, it's not to do with what we're talking about? Yeah, because we should talk with.
this is about the farms on Nantucket,
Oh, separate stuff.
from 1850.
1850.
1850, and you list them all here, who they were and who owned them. And you get down through this list going through here, and you get down to, Quidnet,
Yep.
George Norcross, Edward Norcross, Oscar Norcross, Alan Norcross, James Norcross. This is all from when you turn off the Focus Road to go into Wallwinnet,
Mm-hmm.
then Chase Road stops there, that dirt road goes all the way down, it's a subdivision road. It's
Yep, Chase
been there
Road.
for years, you know? My grandfather was sheriff there for years. And the Norcross owned all of, from the Focus Road to Coordinate Beach. They owned every damn thing.
Really?
Yeah, and over the years, they just, they passed it off, you know? Different families and, cousins, his own property there, and my grandfather had a nice little cottage right down in the pond, beautiful.
Funny thing about real estate,
Huh?
always goes up.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
does, yeah, but they had farms, of course, Nantucket was all, we went as
Depending
kids,
where you are.
riding the bicycle on the weekend or something, we go ride to Cisco, you know? You got the, Lowry Farm, you got the Butler Farm, you got the Gardner Farm, you know,